October 17th of 1961 in France, the Algerian Civil War is wrapping up, and France has all of these citizens that are inside it that are Algerian, and they're holding protests. The chief of police is named Maurice Papon, and he ends up being a guy that we're going to come back to because it turns out like that this is one of those, but there were signs. And what he does is sets a curfew, and then he tells his police force basically do whatever makes sense. And what proceeds to happen in France is uh, really bad. The official records showed 3 deaths that night, October 17th, after the curfew passed. The history books are never going to have an exact number. They pulled 110 bodies out of the river the next morning because they literally just they went wild on these Algerian protesters in France. And that was partially a function of who the French police at that moment were. The French police had gone through and had a anti-communist moment after World War II, like a lot of countries did. But what that meant is they pulled out the police that were like French resistance fighters and left the police that were kind of the just taking orders French. But Papon is like the chief of police, and he's the guy who really did this thing. And then the French proceed to like try really hard not to let this come out at all. It never makes the national media, right? There's like they're literally pulling bodies for days out of the river after this like mass drowning and beating, and no international kind of awareness is happening. And locally, everyone's just trying to hush it. Media's not talking about it, nothing. Anyway, so that chief of police ends up going on to be a politician in France. And then in 1981, a history guy is going through their history paperworks, and they find a bunch of documents from like Nazi era that show that this guy was the guy in France signing off on like all these loads of Jews going to the camps. And that he had like been totally not only complicit but like actively involved in the Nazi thing. And his case ends up becoming one of these cases where they talk about like what is following orders versus what is you just don't get to follow those orders, dude. And that's 20 years after he had set up this massacre of peaceful Algerian protesters. But 15 years before that, he had been loading Jews into boxcars.